The dynamics between parents and their adult children often depend on numerous factors and are shaped early in life. Perhaps the most decisive factor is the parenting style itself, which can be built on understanding trust, cooperation, and support, or conversely on strict control and harsh discipline. The McCullough family seemed at first glance to be a typical middle-class household, educated, financially stable, and rooted in conservative values. The strict parents raised 5 children instilling what they believed to be proper morals and life goals. However, it appears that their children had a different perspective. As the children grew up, they moved away, maintaining only occasional contact with their aging parents via text messages. They remained unaware that both parents had passed away, and shockingly, this had been the case for 4 years. The truth only came to light when the couple's family doctor raised concerns. The detached family, the Mulls, lived in a spacious 3-story house located in a quiet upper-middle-class neighborhood in the small town of Great Bat, Essex, England. The head of the family, John McCullough, was a respected professor at a prestigious university and had authored several academic papers on autism spectrum disorders. His wife Lois devoted her time to creating a well-ordered home and raising their children in October 1988. The Mulls had their youngest child, a daughter named Virginia. At that time, both parents were already in their 40s, and they were raising 2 daughters and 2 sons. Virginia's arrival was unexpected, but given the Mullah's devout religious beliefs, they saw it as a blessing. The Mulla children were brought up with strict rules and discipline. The household operated on a rigid schedule, with each child assigned specific duties. Disobedience was often met with physical punishment. On one occasion, Lois disciplined her younger son with a belt so harshly that his bruises were noticed at school, prompting child welfare services to visit the Mulla home. Despite living together for many years, Lois and John reportedly never displayed much affection for each other. They slept in separate bedrooms, spoke to one another in a reserved manner, and refrained from showing any signs of tenderness. Displays of affection, such as hugs or kisses, were entirely absent from their household. This strict and emotionally distant dynamic extended to their children. The McCullough rarely expressed warmth or praised their kids, believing this might spoil them. Instead, punishments for minor infractions were common. The children were expected to excel academically and contribute to the household, but they were not allowed to visit friends or invite anyone into their home. Discipline was enforced with an iron hand, and breaking the rules was simply not an option. Lois McCullough struggled with obsessive-compulsive disorder from a young age, which was compounded by misophonia, a fear of germs and dirt. This manifested in her obsessive cleaning habits and constant disinfecting of the house. Keeping pets was strictly forbidden, and each of her children was expected to maintain their rooms to her exacting standards. Lois would conduct surprise inspections, and any signs of dust or untidiness would result in severe consequences over time. Lois's mental health deteriorated further. While she had always been reserved and rarely interacted with neighbors, she began avoiding people entirely. She left the house only when absolutely necessary, and even then hurried back as quickly as possible. In her later years, she avoided eye contact, walking with her head down, to prevent interactions alongside her existing anxieties. She developed agoraphobia, leaving her practically housebound. John Mulla, her husband, suffered from diabetes, which eventually led to a rapid decline in his eyesight. By the time he was in his 70s, he had retired from his teaching career and lived on a modest pension like Lois. John rarely left the house. On the rare occasions he ventured out for errands. He didn't greet others, not out of arrogance, but simply because his poor vision made it difficult to recognize faces unless someone directly addressed him. As soon as the older children reached adulthood, they left the Mulla household, scattering to different parts of the country. They built their own lives and families, maintaining only sporadic contact with their parents through phone calls or, more often, text messages. The Mulla family's emotional distance became evident in this pattern. They had no tradition of gathering for holidays, nor did they celebrate special occasions at home. To the grown children, it was enough to know their parents were alive and being cared for by their youngest sibling, who still lived in the family home. Virginia, the youngest of the Mulla children, stood apart from her siblings. Unlike them, she did not rush to leave home after high school. From an early age, Virginia was regarded as an odd and reclusive child. While her siblings had limited social lives due to their parents' strict rules, such as banning guests and outings, Virginia took her isolation further. She struggled to connect even with her brothers and sisters instead. She often talked to herself and concocted elaborate stories, passing them off as true events. As a result, she was labeled a compulsive liar. Her parents, however, seemed unconcerned about her lack of social connections. They believed Virginia had been sent by a higher power to care for them in their old age. The fact that she had no personal life, had never dated, and actively avoided people was seen as entirely natural to Lois and John. Virginia's role as their caregiver was simply her destiny. It is unclear whether Virginia received any formal education after high school, but it's likely she did, as her parents considered it an essential part of life. However, building a career proved impossible for her, as she couldn't stay at any job for long due to her eccentric behavior and tendency to lie for a while. Virginia worked as a bartender at a local pub and also had a job at the post office, but for the most part she spent her time at home helping her parents with household chores. Sometimes her parents would inquire why she wasn't working, but Virginia always had a plausible excuse. Either she was unfairly fired, still looking for a job, or waiting for an invitation from a large company that had already reviewed her resume as her parents grew older. However, they became less and less concerned about their daughter's situation. By the time John reached his 70s, his eyesight had deteriorated significantly, with almost no vision in one eye and blurred sight in the other, so he rarely left the house. Lois's phobia has also worsened over the years, and she only left the house for medical appointments with their family therapist, who monitored their health and adjusted their treatments. The couple hardly interacted with their neighbors. It seemed they were content with this life, especially knowing Virginia would always be there to care for them. Virginia spent a lot of her time on the computer, mostly playing games. She told her parents that she was actively looking for work, sending out her resume to different companies. But as time passed, Virginia never managed to secure a job. She came up with a simple yet effective scheme to continue living off her parents without facing their disapproval, by making them pity her. Instead, Virginia knew how seriously her parents took their health. They regularly went for medical checkups and took their prescribed medications without fail. So Virginia started complaining about her own health, inventing serious conditions that she didn't actually have to make her complaints more believable. She visited doctors describing symptoms she found online. She was sent for various tests and blood work, but of course none of her diagnoses were ever confirmed. She told her parents she had been diagnosed with diabetes, which she claimed she inherited from her father, as well as heart problems. Then she mentioned a tumor and the need for urgent surgery concerned for her health. JN and Lois gave her money for treatment in 2017. Virginia suddenly announced that she was pregnant, but never revealed the name of the father. John and Lois, though shocked by the news, were ready to accept an illegitimate grandchild. After all, their daughter was almost 30, completely alone, and they thought she would have someone to live for after their passing. This time, Virginia's lie went too far. She even bought a fake belly online to pretend she was pregnant, but after a few months she claimed she wasn't feeling well and needed to go to the hospital. When she returned, she said she had lost the unborn child. Her parents mourned the loss, never suspecting that their daughter had simply deceived them. At one point, Virginia suggested to her parents that they let her take full control over their finances and accounts. The elderly couple agreed, as they had little understanding of modern technology and rarely left the house. This gave Virginia complete access to the family accounts, their bank cards, and she could do whatever she wanted with them. By that time, Virginia had developed a habit of impulsive shopping, and now she had the means to indulge it every day. She would order all sorts of unnecessary items from online stores. In fact, most of the things she bought were never even unboxed. She would simply stash the packages in a closet under her bed or in the storage room. However, there was one purchase, a kitchen appliance which Virginia gave to her mother that was actually well received. Her mother accepted the gift with genuine appreciation and even praised Virginia, which was rare for her in early 2018. Virginia suddenly believed she was a talented artist and transformed her room into what resembled an art studio. With paints, easel, and various supplies, she told her parents that her artwork had been highly praised by experts. and that soon her paintings would be displayed at a contemporary art gallery. She even claimed that she would become famous and earn a lot of money around the mid-2000s teens. Virginia began visiting online casino sites regularly, placing bets and constantly losing money over time. Her gambling addiction deepened, and after gaining access to her parents' savings, she started increasing her bets until she had gambled away all their money. Naturally, John and Lois had no idea that they were essentially bankrupt. They couldn't check their account status since they didn't have access to the online banking portal. And by that point, Virginia had started taking out loans in their name, continuing her spending spree on useless items and gambling away their savings. But things couldn't go on like this forever. No one was paying off the loans, the debt kept growing, interest piled up, and Virginia just kept taking out new loans. One day, the bank called their home phone, and John answered. The bank informed him of the substantial debts and outstanding loans. John felt faint upon hearing the news and nearly suffered a heart attack. He immediately told his wife, and together they went to confront Virginia, demanding an explanation. Virginia, however, was quick to play the part of the surprised daughter. She assured them that she would look into it right away. Then she sat down at her computer, clicked away for a few minutes, and claimed that her account had been hacked by criminals who had stolen all their money and taken out loans. Virginia reassured her parents that she would sort everything out, and they would get their stolen money back over the next few months. She put on a show of activity, telling her parents that she had filed a police report and that the criminals were being pursued and would be forced to return everything. Eventually, she told them that everything had been resolved. The money had been returned to their account, and there were no more loans. For a while, John and Lois calmed down, but about 6 months later, they were once again contacted about the growing debts. This time, Virginia convinced her parents that there had been some sort of mistake in the bank system, and the wrong information had been passed along. She was very convincing, and the elderly couple believed their daughter once again. However, Virginia knew that this couldn't continue forever. She had been taking out loans and knew that the bank wouldn't just let them slide. Her parents would keep receiving calls, and soon they would have more questions. Eventually, they would stop believing her lies, or even worse, after another round of deceit, they might contact the authorities to figure out who was mismanaging their finances. The horrific plan. Virginia thought long and hard about how to keep living in her parents' house, spending their money and taking out loans in their name without anyone being able to hold her accountable. Shockingly, her older siblings remained unaware of what was really going on. They didn't call their parents often, and even less frequently visited them. Meanwhile, Jan and Lois never complained or shared their concerns with their children. By March 2019, the situation had escalated to a breaking point. Virginia understood that she was walking on thin ice, and she had to act quickly. Unfortunately, her solution was as shocking as it was chilling. She decided to eliminate her elderly parents, but it had to be done in a way that no one would suspect anything, and everyone would still believe that John and Lois were alive and well in their large home. Luckily, they had always kept to themselves, so the neighbors likely wouldn't notice anything unusual for a while, since Lois and Jan had numerous chronic health issues. They were always taking different medications, and Virginia was the one responsible for keeping track of them. Her father was almost blind, and her mother trusted her completely with managing their medications, as there had never been any problems in the past. Now Virginia decided to experiment with the dosage of sedatives, blood pressure medications, and the psychiatric drugs her mother took for her mental health issues. For several months, IIA secretly poisoned her own parents, carefully observing how they reacted to different medications. Unfortunately, the elderly couple, trusting their daughter and believing it was just a normal seasonal health issue, didn't go to the doctor about their deteriorating condition. They chalked it up to the usual symptoms they had experienced many times before, convinced it would soon pass. In early June 2019, Virginia had gathered enough powerful prescription medications that would have been more than enough to end the lives of both of her parents. However, she decided to be cautious and bought a sharp kitchen knife, just in case the drugs didn't work as planned. On June 17, 2019, Virginia finally made the decision that this would be the last day of her father and mother's lives. She behaved as usual without raising any suspicion. She cooked dinner, went to the store, and helped her mother with some household chores. In the evening, she sat with her parents while they watched TV, and later prepared them both a deadly cocktail that would ensure they wouldn't wake up the next morning. Her father occasionally enjoyed a small amount of strong alcohol from his collection of expensive bottles stored in his office. This collection had taken him years to build, and in retirement, he savored the opportunity to try different drinks. It was in the bottle of aged whiskey that Virginia mixed a lethal dose of heart medication. Unfortunately, the alcohol masked the bitter taste of the pills. Her mother, however, didn't drink alcohol at all. For Lois, Virginia made a herbal tea and insisted that the strange bitter taste came from medicinal herbs, which supposedly had no side effects. But Lois refused to drink the rest of the tea. JN finished his drink and Virginia helped him to his bedroom, wishing him good night. She left her mother's tea on the bedside table, still hoping that Lois would drink it before going to her own room. Virginia took one last glance at her mother through the partially open door, then went to bed that night. Virginia slept soundly without any guilt or second thoughts. The next morning, she didn't rush to get out of bed, staying under the covers until almost 11. An indulgence in their house, she decided that if no one had come by to check on her by that time and scold her for being lazy, there would be no one to do so. First, she went into her father's room. He was lying in bed, seemingly peacefully asleep. Virginia touched his hand, but it was cold and stiff, meaning he had passed away shortly after going to sleep. His heart simply couldn't handle the combination of medications mixed with alcohol, and it had stopped next. Virginia went to her mother's bedroom, but she found that Lois hadn't finished her drink. The woman was still alive but couldn't get out of bed due to the large dose of sedatives she had consumed. She was disoriented and confused, unsure of what was happening around her. Lois asked her daughter what time it was, and Virginia told her it was still too early, and that she could go back to sleep after turning on her mother's favorite radio station. Virginia left the room and went to the utility closet. There she retrieved a sharp knife and a hammer that she had purchased in advance. It was clear that she didn't have a detailed plan, but she knew these tools would help her finish what she had started when Virginia returned to her mother's room. Lois was smiling, listening to her favorite song, and seemed completely unaware of her daughter's approach. Virginia hesitated for a moment, but then raised the hammer and brought it down hard on Lois's head. Blood began to flow from the wound, but Lois calmly turned her gaze to her daughter and asked what she was doing without responding. Virginia grabbed the knife and began to frantically stab her mother in the neck and chest. Within a few minutes, the brutal assault was over. Virginia dropped the blood-stained knife onto the floor, knelt down and took her mother's still warm hand in hers. She sat silently for about half an hour before calmly going to the shower to wash off the blood and change into clean clothes the following day. Virginia stayed in the house with her parents' bodies, trying to figure out how to dispose of them. She considered various options but realized that it would be impossible to secretly remove the bodies and bury them. For one, the neighbors might notice something odd, and secondly, she simply didn't have the strength to move two bodies out of the house and dig graves in the end. Virginia came up with a grim solution. She decided to wall her parents up inside their own home. However, carrying out this plan would require significant effort. First, she went to a sporting goods store and bought 2 sleeping bags which she intended to use as makeshift coffins. Then she headed to a hardware store where she bought dozens of rolls of plastic sheeting, a mix for making cement expanding foam and cinder blocks, which were delivered directly to her home when the neighbors asked. Virginia explained that her father was planning a small renovation project and they didn't press further, struggling with the weight of the bodies. Virginia packed her parents into the sleeping bags and then wrapped them in layer after layer of plastic sheeting and tape, trying to make them as airtight as possible. She then dragged her father's remains to his office, placing them in a corner behind his desk. She prepared the cement mixture according to the instructions and began building a makeshift sarcophagus around the body. She poured the cement generously over the remains, filling in any gaps with expanding foam. Virginia decided to leave her mother's body in the room where the violent incident had occurred. She shoved the sleeping bag into the closet along with the blood-stained blanket and other bedding, then covered everything in expanding foam. After that, she wrapped the closet in 20 rolls of plastic sheeting to finish. She built a wall from the remaining cinder blocks, sealing off the corner where the closet with her mother's remains stood. On the same day, Virginia ordered 2 new credit cards from the bank in the names of her now deceased parents and began to relieve stress by making online purchases. She also sent several messages to her siblings pretending to be her mother, telling them that she and her father had decided to get away for a while and were going to the seaside to relax and improve their health. Her older siblings, who Ra rarely visited, didn't question her and simply wished their parents a nice time away the pandemic. As a cover for the next 6 months, Virginia went about her usual routine, acting as if nothing had happened. She went grocery shopping, interacted with the neighbors, collected her parents' pensions, and occasionally sent messages to relatives on behalf of her mother, trying to lull them into a false sense of security. She even made appointments for her parents with their family doctor, but can't canal them with various excuses if anyone asked about her parents, Jan and Lois, and why they hadn't been seen in a while. She explained that they were staying with one of their many children in the spring of 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic swept across the world, and a global lockdown was declared. Everyone was stuck at home, which for Virginia seemed like a stroke of luck. She no longer had to come up with reasons for why her parents weren't seen outside, and with the lockdown in place, no one would be visiting them anytime soon. At the same time, Virginia occasionally called the family doctor, pretending to be her mother, asking for advice. But whenever he suggested they come in for an appointment or offered to visit them, she would come up with excuses. She sent messages to her siblings from Lois's phone, asking about their lives and the grandchildren, but never invited them over if any of them mentioned planning a visit. She would discourage them. She even called the police, pretending to be her mother, and complained about noisy neighbors or troublemakers. Over time, Virginia's behavior became increasingly odd. She started pushing herself on people she barely knew, offering them friendship, inventing strange stories about her personal life, saying she was about to get married and leave town. She bothered delivery drivers with all sorts of questions and frequently called the police for trivial reasons. In the small town, people started to think of her as the local eccentric, harmless. But a little off. The truth was, she was desperately trying to draw attention to herself, and likely subconsciously hoping that her parents' bodies would finally be discovered. For over 4 years, Virginia Mallow successfully managed to conceal the deaths of her parents. Even her own siblings never suspected that their mother and father had been gone for so long, believing the messages and greeting cards they received were truly from them, when in fact it was Virginia sending them. The only person who suspected something was wrong was the family doctor. The doctor became concerned when the Mallows, who had always been vigilant about their health, failed to make appointments for routine checkups, lab tests, and adjustments to their ongoing treatments. Virginia was the one to pick up their prescriptions, assuring the doctor that everything was fine with her parents. Lois had repeatedly scheduled appointments, but each time Virginia canceled, citing various excuses. On several occasions, the doctor personally visited the Mallow home, hoping to check on their health, but he was always met by Virginia, who claimed that her parents were out visiting relatives in the end. In August 2023, the doctor contacted the police to report his suspicions and asked them to investigate. On September 1, 2023, the police called the Mallow home and asked Virginia to have her parents come to the door. She became visibly anxious and tried to convince them that her parents had gone on vacation and decided not to bring their phones, so no one would disturb them. She insisted that her mom and dad would return in a couple of weeks. But when a month passed without any word, the authorities began an investigation and obtained a search warrant. When the police finally forced their way into the house and Virginia was formally charged in connection with the deaths of her parents, she calmly told them she had something to show them. She led the officers to her father's office and pointed to a makeshift tomb by the wall, then moved to her mother's room, silently nodding toward the sealed closet. The bodies of the Mallow were recovered that same day. Due to the advanced decomposition, it was difficult to determine the exact cause of death. However, the daughter, now charged with the crime, fully confessed and voluntarily described in detail how she had ended her parents' lives when asked why she did it. Virginia blamed old childhood resentments, accused John and Lois of cruelty, and portrayed them as true monsters. When the tragic events at the Mallow household came to light, the residents of the small town of Great B were shocked, but perhaps no one was more horrified than the older children of the deceased couple, who had always believed that their parents were alive and well, being cared for by their younger sister. In fact, it was precisely because of the distant relationship between family members that Virginia had been able to conceal her crime for so many years, On October 11, 2024, Virginia was found guilty of the deliberate double crime. According to investigators, her motives were not rooted in childhood trauma or mistreatment as she had claimed, but were driven by financial gain. Virginia had been living off her parents' pension for years. All the while accumulating large debts in their names, she was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 35 years.